So much. Welcome to the April Tech Industry Luncheon on the Remo platform. My name is Kathy Curry. I am a technology manager with State Farm, and I'm also a member of the programs team that produces these luncheon events. It really is a true pleasure to be able to be with you today and to open our program. If you are experiencing any problems using Remo, you can seek assistance in the FAQ folder, and you can reach that by clicking on the link in the chat room. You can also try refreshing your browser. The presenting sponsor of the Tech Industry Luncheon Series in 2021 is the UT Design Program at the University of Texas at Dallas. For a few words about the university, please welcome the Assistant Dean for the Johnson School of Engineering and Computer Science and the Director of the UT Design Program, Rod Weatherskog.
Well, thanks, Kathy, and to you and Kevin and the other distinguished panelists. Thanks for getting us up to speed on the power of using DevOps today. Kevin, for many of the UT Dallas students attending today, this is their second time learning about this topic from you. They eagerly signed up for round two. So again, thanks for your willingness to share and your expertise. Really looking forward to hearing from all of you. The University of Texas at Dallas has the second largest computer science department in the United States, according to the American Society of Engineering Education. This year, research faculty in cybersecurity, computer systems, software engineering, intelligent systems, machine learning, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Everything, and networking have received almost $8 million in federal and industry funding for their research at UT Dallas. Why should you care? Why should I, representing UT Design Senior Capstone Program, even bring this up? Because companies are sponsoring seniors as they work on their capstone projects in these various areas, taking advantage of a huge critical mass of knowledge and expertise to get back burner projects done, to get a good long look at students to potentially hire as interns or full-time engineers, and or getting new insights on new and old challenges. The next round of computer science sponsored projects starts on August 23rd. That's our fall semester. And based on current enrollment, we're expecting 70 teams, 5 students each. That's over 350 students. Each student typically works about 10 to 12 hours per week. So collectively, you get 50 to 60 hours of effort per week for one semester. Project proposals accepted by July 23rd will have a sponsorship fee of $8,000, which is a $2,000 discount from proposals submitted after that time. And by the way, all of our engineering departments are also starting in the fall, and there's still time to sponsor an engineering project starting this May, our summer semester. So Don Prochelle can answer all of your questions if you're interested in sponsoring a project in bioengineering, electrical and computer engineering, mechanical engineering, or any combination. I'm going to post some links on the general chat for you to learn more about UT Design, as well as a place to go for examples for previously sponsored projects, and contact info for Pete Porman, who can connect you to our research faculty, Don Prochelle, who will take good care of you for engineering capstone, and of course, myself, I'll answer all of your CS Capstone sponsorship questions. Thanks for your time. And Kathy, back to you.
Thanks, Rod. Appreciate that. All right, so information on UT Design and other information like the Tech Titans membership will be posted in the chat function, which is to the right of the main screen. You're encouraged to stick around today after the presentation for an optional networking session. The plans are to conclude that session at 1:30. Your ability to ask questions has been improved with the use of Remo. To the right of the main screen, you should see a box that has both the chat room I mentioned a moment ago and a Q&A function. As you have questions, please post those using the Q&A function. You can also vote on the questions, which keeps them moving to the top of the Q&A feature. All right, so as you've already heard, and that's what you're here for, we've got an outstanding panel today that's going to discuss DevOps. DevOps is defined as the practice of combining software development and IT operations to deliver services at a high rate of speed. So first, let's meet our panel. Today we have Kojo Panford. Kojo joined Zix in September 2017, and he's experienced senior DevOps engineer. He has over 10 years of information technology experience spanning across several industries that includes healthcare, finance, and technology. When I asked Kojo to describe himself in 3 words or less, he says, versatile, reliable, and motivated. Kojo loves traveling, he likes trying new things, and you'll either find him at the gym or walking a trail. Welcome, Kojo Panford. Courtney Kistler joined Zulily in January 2021 as CTO and SVP of Technology. Courtney brings a diverse technology experience from startups like CyberSafe and WorldStream Communications to beloved global brands. Courtney is a lifelong learner who loves reading and running. Welcome, Courtney Kistler. Next up is Brian Fenster. Brian has over 2 decades of experience developing enterprise supply chain solutions. He uses data-driven approaches to optimize the flow of value, improve business outcomes, and improve the lives of software engineers. Brian prefers to see life from his motorcycle. He also sees every corner as an opportunity for continuous improvement of skills needed to stay safe in an unpredictable world. Because Brian uses risk budget for fun, he prefers to optimize his development workflow to minimize risk and drama. And he optimizes his weekends for sleep. Welcome, Brian Fenster. Next up is John Willis. John is a senior director in the Global Transformation Office at Red Hat. His IT career spans over 40 years, including time at a number of open source focused DevOps related companies. John has written 11 books and built 12 startups. John is a musician at heart. He sings and he plays the guitar. And last, but certainly not least, is our panel moderator, Kevin Odell. Kevin is a technology director with State Farm. He oversees the enablement and adoption of DevOps practices across many product areas. You may have heard Kevin speak in one of the thought leader sessions that was prior to the awards gala in 2020. And as you just learned today, he also presented to UT Dallas student orgs. When I asked Kevin if you could be described in 3 words or less, Kevin replied, chips and salsa. Clearly, that's his favorite snack. Kevin's hobbies include watching the other panelists' YouTube videos about DevOps. I can hardly say that without laughing, but it's great. And on the weekends, you'll find Kevin at the lake. Kevin, welcome. The floor is yours.
All right. Thanks, Kathy. Really appreciate that. Great introduction. And wow, it's pretty amazing to be on a panel, I guess, facilitating a panel with these distinguished folks who all have so much experience and so much experience that they can share with us. So I'm going to just jump right into this. We don't have a lot of time. And if you guys have ever talked to these people or watched any of their YouTube videos, which I recommend, so go Google them, they can talk forever on this stuff. So especially DevOps. So first thing we want to hear about this DevOps term. What is it? Where did it come from? And I'm going to point right to John to answer that question for us, since he actually wrote this book, a co-author on this book, the DevOps Handbook. He knows a little bit about it. So John, enlighten us with where did DevOps come from? And just so you guys know, you guys are all on mute right now, so you're going to need to unmute.
Thanks for reminding me. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, just quickly. I mean, I was thinking about this. We're a little bit north of 10 years of this thing that got coined by Patrick Dubois as DevOps, right? The first DevOps Day was in Ghent, 2009. I was fortunate enough to be there. In 2019, we had a 10-year anniversary. I go back to Adam Jacob has had, the founder of Chef, has had a couple of definitions over the years of what DevOps was. I still like his first definition, which is it's a cultural and professional movement, full stop, right? And just there was the first DevOps Days in Ghent, and then Damon Edwards and I ran the first DevOps Days in Silicon Valley, and we did a podcast after that to just try to describe the amazing thing that we witnessed, like 300 people And we came up with this sort of accidental taxonomy or acronym CAMS, culture, automation, and sharing, right? So the automation, the measurement, but you had to have the culture. And then Jez Humble added comms, L, which brilliantly moved. I think he really sort of captured the, oh, of course, right? And, culture, automation, lean, measurement, and sharing. And just in the fast run of history, we have Gene Kim introducing really a body of work from GoalRat, which actually in the Phoenix Project is a purposeful rewrite. We learn about that. I've been on this like rampage road race to see how Dr. Deming has fit into this whole picture. And just to end the story, there are a lot of heroes in this game. But I have to do a shout out to Courtney, because I think in the early days, first off, Courtney was the first enterprise version. I had been reading about value stream mapping and lean and Mike Roth's original book, but and I actually tried to do one and it didn't turn out great. And then I get Courtney, and she just put it in perspective. And as you talk to people throughout the years, almost all of them would go back and say, "Oh yeah, no, Courtney was one of my mentors." And I would be remiss not to point out like Ross Clanton and Heather Mickman of what they did. So the Courtney originally at Nordstrom and Ross Clanton and were really the burst that we needed of enterprise people, validating, not changing. The big four would always say, "Oh, the big companies can't do it this way," and then Courtney showed up, and Heather and Ross showed up and said, "No, baloney. We are doing it this way, and we're doing it in the biggest scalable way." So that's really my quick run of the DevOps story.
So can we get into a little bit what is DevOps? Is it developers in operation, development, and then operating a system and why does it come together? So anybody want to talk to the story on what that really means, and what's the objectives, and what are we trying to get the outcomes from DevOps?
I think one of my favorite kind of representations is you build it, you run it, you own it, you improve it. And, as someone who grew up in infrastructure, I started as a security engineer. My career started in infrastructure engineering and support, and seeing the lack of understanding and empathy in both directions was a huge unlock for me. And it is all about culture. You'll hear people talk about tooling and automation, and yes, that's part of it, but the primary success criteria is really the culture and breaking down the silos and the barriers that might exist and coming together. And John mentioned the value streams. I'm super passionate about that. I know Brian is as well. It's like, if you know your value stream, your org design and how you're structured should not be a barrier to delivering that value. And so how do you focus on the outcome of needing to deliver that value, and then bringing together the expertise across those teams to really turn it into more of that? If you build it, you also run it, you own it, you improve it. So that's kind of at least the way I think about it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I go back, I think, to Brian, the opening about Brian. Brian, you talked about, I like to sleep on the weekends. Can you talk a little bit about how does DevOps enable that for you?
Well, I came at this from the point of view of how do we implement continuous delivery, right? How do we get really rapid change into production? And going down that journey, I discovered that, that we have more stability because we're making very small changes that if they break really small, and we can rapidly fix, right? Now, wrapping around that is DevOps. And to me, DevOps, the best model I've seen for that is development is us building things, and operations is the business using the things we built and us working very closely together to get that done. I've never really seen it as IT operations. That wasn't big enough for me, right? Coming from an enterprise, it was really important. I'm working very closely with those end users so we can do the best flow of value to the enterprise. But the fact that that we can make really small changes and have the flow of information to allow those really small changes that happen really fast means that if something breaks, I can wake up. I have a standardized way to get it fixed really fast without having to go and do some, heroics and firefighting method to get it done. That I have to make up when I'm tired, and get a change deployed to fix the business. I go back to sleep really, really fast, and it happens less frequently, right? And so I drive for really fast delivery just so I can sleep better at night.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. So gathering kind of what everybody's talked about here, DevOps seems to be a movement where we're trying to bring a little bit more common sense into building products for our business and for our customers, right? Building them the right way. I like the phrase, building the right thing the right way. Putting that in production, seeing that thing work, and really owning that whole life cycle of that product end to end, from thinking about it, what do we want to build, all the way to actually operating that thing in production. And what I'm gathering from you guys is it's really bringing in a lot of organizations, and the way we've done a lot of things from a project world, it's build, throw it over the wall to another entity that's then going to support it. It's probably going to break, right? Because you don't know, when you're just building a test environment, you don't have all the factors, right? And I always say the best test environment is your production environment. Essentially, you get it over there, and then it starts on fire, and then there's fingers pointing back and forth, right? And that's really where DevOps is saying, hey, let's knock that down. Common sense, bring those teams together, bring those people together, add in the tooling to automate as much stuff as we possibly can, right? And have this as our culture, have this in our DNA moving forward. And I think about that in the frame of, you hear about all these organizations that are out there going through these transformations, but a lot of times they're labeled agile transformations, digital transformations, anything transformations, ET transformation, right? But you got to think under the covers. Essentially, what they're trying to do is product management and DevOps, right? I'm just interested in your guys' experience with that. If you've gone through a transformation, if you led transformations, what was it called, and what was changing underneath the covers to make it happen?
No, I agree with you, Kevin. I also wanted to add to your awesome, definition, explanation, that there is, through that transformation, much more of, an adaptation to, I guess, a culture of accepting that we might fail a lot more often, but that's not necessarily a bad thing if we're doing it a lot faster, and if we're able to resolve those issues and, get production back into a good state through automation. So we did at the organization that, I've been working at, go through sort of that transformation that you're talking about, and definitely all those, concepts with automation at its core were, really what got us there.
Sure.
One of the things I've been really fortunate about is to have a lot of smart friends that are willing to take my calls. And by the way, Courtney, you owe me a call. I know you're really busy. But I was on the phone. I get the fortunate thing to speak to people like John Allspar and on a regular basis. And so a few weeks ago we were talking about, and he said something. We were talking about how, is our industry a science yet, right? Like, we sort of dance around certain aspects of like DevOps is a science, or sciencing the S out of DevOps. And John said there's something I thought was really cool, and it relates to your Kojo, the failure part. He said that when he talked to his mentor, Dr. Woods, he said that you can't call something a science until you can identify all your failures. And I think that is the me being sort of Deming geek, that is the PDCA of the world, right? You plan, do, you check, you act, or Roth would call it improvement kata, which is just a variant of that. But it is about, it almost normalizes the concept of failure. There is no failure. It's all scientific thinking. It's experiment, check the results determine the next pace. So yeah, I double down on what you're saying, Cora. It's like we really need to understand that failure is an embracement of our productivity and our transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And John, I think failure is the expected outcome. We celebrate the wins. The fact is that we need to improve how we can deliver to lower the cost of delivery, so that when we can deliver in smaller pieces, because everything's always wrong, right? The requirements are wrong, or we misunderstood the requirements, or they change before we can deliver. And so, improving that entire flow of information through the organization so that we can find out how wrong we are really fast to be wrong small. I don't like fail fast. I like fail small. Right? Fail fast always rubs me the wrong way.
It's about feedback, shorten the feedback loop, right? Right, Courtney?
Totally. And I've been changing some of my language on this topic too, to it's about learning fast. Because sometimes if your environment is not psychologically safe, using the word failure can have unintended implications. And so, yes, it's a complex system. We all work in complex systems. But if you can get your learning loop to be quick and encourage that there's going to be that complexity. So let's embrace it. But I found that if I say learn fast, and the outcome is like, how do we learn as fast as we can? Sometimes my teams are a little bit more willing to share that versus I failed, I learned. Here's what I learned. I expected this outcome. This is what happens. My next hypothesis is why, and I'm going to go down this path for this reason. So anyways, I just share that because I've gone through a little bit of I would say reflection as a senior leader around how my teams sometimes are scared. There's fear. And, no matter what environment you're trying to create, there could be that reality where people aren't ready to accept that they might fail.
I like that. That's really good, and really interested for your perspective there, Courtney, on sitting in that seat now as an executive, right? And being okay with that when you've got priorities, you've got things that you need to get done, and how do you still enable a culture of, hey, we're going to fail, we're going to get some things wrong, we're going to learn, we're going to learn fast, but still delivering on the outcomes that you have out there. What are some techniques that you use?
So you're touching on something that I'm super passionate about in this movement, and whether or not we, the transformation question was very relevant too. It's like I've had pretty much endless flavors of the use of that word. One thing I think is not always as common is the recognition of the senior leadership transformation required for success. And so I've been, trying to figure out how do I lead by example? So one thing I believe very passionately in is, and John mentioned the addition of the L in CAMS. As a leader, I need to be close to the work. It's called Gemba. Don't have to use that word. But in order for me to really be credible, relevant, authentic, genuine as a senior leader, and be a problem solver alongside my teams, I have to understand where the problems are. And if I'm not engaging in a meaningful way with my teams, there's no version of that occurring. And so when I think about, leading with intent, being super clear on the outcomes we're trying to achieve, and then I'm a big believer also, this is another lean thing, minimize burden. It's all about the team. How are you making sure that teams feel like the work they're doing is meaningful? Like no one wants to be working on things that are not meaningful. So as a senior leader, how am I talk about honoring reality and extracting reality. How do I really know the reality in my teams? And so for me, that's just a huge focus. And then trying to bring along the rest of the leaders that I work with to be okay with that. Getting close to the work doesn't mean that you're a micromanager. Getting close to the work, if you show up in the right way, is actually a way to create high trust and psychological safety. So I don't know if that's totally answering your question, but I believe that there's a lot of behaviors that are required in roles like mine in order to make sure that we're maximizing the opportunities and minimizing the burden in the organization.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. And a question that I get quite a bit is, where does it start? Where do you have to get the buy-in to really have if you want to call it a DevOps transformation, or if you really just want to change your culture, essentially is what we want to do. You know, where do you start? So I'm really interested to get your guys' thoughts on this. And it's not, you can't just say everywhere, because obviously that would be great. But where do you start? So I'm thinking about people that are watching right now and they go, yeah, this sounds really good. We haven't really had that movement that we need in my organization. Where do you recommend people start from? Who do you have to get the buy-in from in your organization? Is it your teams, your middle management, executives? Just looking for some feedback there.
You know, I come from the opposite end of the organization from Courtney, right? Because I'm an individual contributor, okay? First, you need to hire someone like Courtney, right? An executive who gets it, who wants to be engaged and it doesn't micromanage. You know, there's a difference between giving people solutions and giving people hard problems to solve, right? So you have an executive that gives people really hard problems to solve that have measurable outcomes. And then you find the people like me and other red shirts that are running around trying to make things better, who care, to dig in and try to solve those problems and start trying to engage everybody else, right? And then you start growing those communities, and you have that partnership across the report tree, right? And start bringing in everybody that's in between the executive and the people on the front lines doing the work.
You know, I was going to say, Jody Moki, who is another really so interesting persona in our industry. He's hopped around. One of his jobs was at Ticketmaster, and I got to spend a day with him. And that's one thing I do love doing. I get to spend a day with people. Like, that's awesome. But at Ticketmaster, at their headquarters, basically, as we're walking around, I noticed that every set of cubicles had an exposed Kanban board and some value stream map up. And I had asked him, and he said, oh, yeah, that's the way we roll. But his point was, it was go to Gemba. It was, if everybody was out of the building for a fire drill or something, he literally could walk around to each of the service groups and get a real sense between the Kanban board and the value stream map that was sort of corresponding to it. And so it really comes back to sort of visualization, right? And you know, not just sort of graphs and things, but being able to visualize. And I'll say one last thing. I'm a big fan of the Team Topologies book. You know, in the Team Topologies book, they do a really good job about talking about team bonding and just a lot of sort of, there's some really good research. Yeah, there you go. Thanks, Cody. And it's one of the books that it's actually one of my favorite. I mean, Deborah's Handbook, please buy it. It puts my kids through college. But I mean, I think Team Topologies is one of the best books that's come out of the IT revolution space because it is so informative. It's fact-based, and they're just pointing to incredible research about teams, team bonding. You know, and they have a notion of this whole team API. You know, I know we're short, so just look it up. This notion of how teams construct their own sort of social API. Anyway, it's about visualization and not just graphs, but you know, how people visually understand other teams' work.
Awesome. And yeah, and just to add to that, and you know, something that Courtney was saying, one of the very interesting things I think about getting that executive feedback and, you know, just seeing who all is in the room when you want to go through that transformation is like, I know that with us, one of the biggest revelations that we had was that we're already doing a lot of the DevOps type things. We already have so many of the people that we need. The only thing we needed to do was come together and do what John was saying, which is, you know, visualize and where are we now? What are our processes? Where are those bottlenecks? And then, you know, what is our end state going to be? So I just wanted to add that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I think I agree with all those statements, and I don't think there's necessarily a right answer to that question, because it really, you do need to get everybody involved, and it can start anywhere as long as you get a good group of people that really understand the change and that can drive it and get behind it, right? You know, one of the things John, you mentioned team topologies, and that kind of gets into a little bit of a different topic. One of the things I really liked about team topologies is something that I'll say, sometimes I get some knives thrown at me when I make this comment, but they talk about, even from an architecture perspective, taking a team first approach to architecture, right? That's not always how we used to work, right? It used to be, we are going to create an architecture on a whiteboard or on a Visio document that's going to be as pretty as it can be. No lines are going to cross. And if we see two boxes that look similar. We're going to make it the same because bigger's better, right? But then the book really talks about, hey, the team first approach, where you got to think about who's going to actually build and run this stuff in production, and how are they going to communicate with other teams and components or whatever in the architecture, which I took back and I go, like, heck yes, as someone that runs product teams, like that is a thing we need to be thinking about, right? And so with that,
we can't be bimodal in our thinking, right? Me and Courtney in some forum today, and there's a lot of discussion about velocity and deploys, right? And sometimes we get ourselves into these things that are really interesting at first, but then over time, like the two pizza team and the breakout team, that's great. What I like about team topologies is they do a counterbalancing discussion where they say, at what point is there sort of a cognitive overload on a team, right? Like we don't talk about that. We spray out platitudes, and not platitudes. There were useful things like two pizza teams, and yes, everybody goes down that role, and then there's a learning point of like, well, this is not working there. It's not working there, and I do love the fact that they give that counterbalance, and I think that that's a cautionary tale for all the things we do. Is deploys per day the most meaningful thing after you hit some level of maturity? I don't know. My take would be no, right? But we got to be real careful about these sort of solid, things that we put in stone about this is DevOps. You must do this, and then there's a point in which, like, we need to be objective about a learning. Is it always the truth, or anyway?
Yeah, that's actually, I wrote a rant about DORA metrics recently, John, where it's it's creeping and becoming another silver bullet. And in my rant, I rant on Medium a lot. It's like, hey, those metrics are on page 19 of Accelerate. Read the rest of the book. Put it in context, because it depends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you're both touching on something that I definitely have observed in the big organizations that I've been in, and from our network of folks that have worked at big organizations, is that everyone wants the answer. So the other common one is go all in on Spotify. Just become Spotify. If you do what Spotify says, you're going to have magic. And in reality, it's like, again, it's even Spotify says don't do that.
Yeah, Spotify doesn't even run the Spotify model. So.
Yeah, but it's like outcomes are what matter, and you need to be focused on the outcomes. It needs to be a balanced, set of outcomes. And I love your rant, Brian, by the way. Everyone should look that up because it is awesome. And it's just so important to be clear on, like, what outcome are we trying to achieve? It does evolve over time. I love what John said. Deploys per day, interesting. And I kind of brought this up earlier today, the viscosity. How hard is it for you to deliver in your organization? How many dependencies do you have? Because even teams, like I'm in an organization where there's a lot of product teams, but there's still a lot of dependencies between those teams. That is a reality. So, like, how are you managing through the, bottlenecks to delivering value and really creating the right structure? Marty Kagan did a great blog post on this. Like, everyone went big on product and forgot that in most enterprises, in most companies, even small companies, you're going to have dependencies. So don't forget that impediments matter, and who's ruthlessly reducing the impediments in your value streams. If you don't have anyone playing that role, or you don't have that capability in your organization, you're going to make limited progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to add, I think that's huge. That's so important to make sure that we have the same goals. And that's one of the things that we saw through our transformation, was just that we gained so much by just putting those different people on the different teams just in the same room and rallying around a common goal. Because I think, of course, when you have the operations people, they sort of want their thing, reliability, et cetera. Dev, they're trying to crank out features. They're working, really hard. QA is also doing their thing. And it's not until, everybody gets into that same room and starts planning together and starts, iterating together, that you start to see, all this progress that Courtney was talking about.
Yeah, so many great points there. I love the reference to Spotify. And as soon as you say, the Spotify model, I go right to scaled agile, right? Safe, A lot of organizations see that too, and they go, wow, there is my prescription to be an agile, boom, here I go, right? And they take it and they want to run with it. So I think that's a really important thing is you got to figure out what works for you, and you have to really understand underneath what are those values and what are those things you're trying to accomplish.
And Kevin, for me, one of the things, I'll be in the field, I'll do a lot of interviews with people, and I learn a lot through sort of the views of the person coming in and abstracting. But every once in a while, again, two people that I like to go to sort of validate my grounding is Courtney and another gentleman called Scott Prater. And a lot of times I'll call Scott and I'm like, okay, should I hate safe? Or what? And he'll walk me through the reality check of like how, like Courtney's an expert at this, right? Like she knows all the tools. She's read all the books. And when I've done podcasts with her, like, oh, Courtney, what are you doing now at this new company? And she'll walk you through the way she's understanding that organization. And you got to be very careful of cargo culting in this industry as well. And I think, I've always admired Courtney's ability to sort of know all the tools and know how to fit to the culture, the behavior, and the patterns of the organization that she's doing.
Yeah, I think that it's a very valid point. And, when you talk about Spotify, you talk about SAFe, and then you talk about like, a lot of us are in large organizations, and I would say even small organizations, you have a whole bunch of dependencies. We have a whole bunch of product teams, right, to have to work together to deliver something. And trying to break those dependencies is really hard, but when you read a book like by, Marty Keegan's books, they talk about this one product team that can just do everything by themselves. And it's like, oh, that'd be great, right? But the reality is we're usually not there, and we have to work through dependencies. So I'm interested, and I know Brian is very much a value stream expert. I'm going to call him that. You don't like that, but when it's in your title, you're an expert, man. Come on. I'm really interested in, what are some strategies that we can use when we really want to get autonomous teams that really can hold their own and really own a product but have all these dependencies? How do you break dependencies? What do you do in a large organization when people own certain things and like master data management? I got this. You have to call me, right? SOA to the extreme. What are some things you guys have seen work to say, hey, let's focus on the objective here to be able to independently deploy, make quick changes, be close to the customer by still managing the kind of the chaos and then a large enterprise brings.
Yeah, well, and first let me touch on the one person who's an expert who owns something, right? Is that if you have an organization where you've got that one go-to person, your organization's at risk. 100%. Some people, I've had managers say, oh yeah, we're going to have this one person do it, so they're really good at it. And they never think about vacation, winning the lottery, or getting hit by a bus. Those are real things. But when it comes to how do we manage those dependencies, like if you have a big product that multiple teams are contributing to, have you done some domain mapping of what the capabilities are that are being delivered for that product? Which teams own those? What are the communication paths between those domain capabilities? What are those dependencies? How do we have to look at the architecture of the application and of the teams so that we can optimize to make those teams more decoupled, right? And, coming from, when I worked at Walmart, I worked on, one of the things I worked on for years was a 25 million line monolith that ran most of the distribution centers and was supported by a whole bunch of teams. I mean, incredibly tightly coupled, right? And so what do? We look at that and we figure out, okay, how do we start carving these things up so that those teams don't have to be tightly coupled? But you have to be very deliberate about that architecture, both the application architecture you intend and the team architecture that's going to build that new architecture. And it takes time, and you don't ever want to do a rewrite. I can speak from experience on multiple fails on that. Don't ever rewrite an application. Just start organizing things to evolve that thing to better.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that?
Earlier you alluded to tooling and the way Courtney approaches that and the right fit for the orgs. And DevOps is definitely not about just the tooling, but I think it is a great place to start a common conversation. So I think that's something really important to do, is to create sort of like this common base, to find the best tools, not to force them, but once you are able to find those common tools, is, you automate so much of the troubles and stuff away, so that all the different, teams and all this chaos that you're talking about, it gets a little bit better, because people don't have to worry about, how am I going to test this? How am I going to, if I break this, how am I going to, recover, which also alludes to sort of like the psychological safety that Courtney was talking about earlier. So I think that's also a very important thing, is to look at, your stack and what are you using? How can we automate to get around, the things that causes so much grief?
Kevin, you've got some questions in your in the Q&A you might want to address that are part of the conversation. I don't know if you can see that or not to the right. There's a
I got them.
Kevin,
I actually clicked on one to get it. Oh, go ahead, Courtney.
I was just going to add just one last comment on this topic, because there's a phrase that I use that sometimes, I got to explain myself, but it's some amount of discipline enables speed. And what I find with this topic around like really being ruthless about dependency minimization, it requires discipline. It requires investing and letting the teams have the space and the capacity to really do the work. And a lot of organizations don't want to commit to the discipline. But what I found, and I can't remember if Kojo said it or Kevin, like if you do that work, you actually will get better outcomes. But is the organization patient enough to give the teams the time to do it? And I think that's where, and a lot of us, I think, have done this throughout our journey, lean on your network of, like Brian's done this, John's done this, Kojo, sounds like you've done this. It's like, how do we help organizations see that the path of dependency minimization or elimination is actually going to get you to a better place? Because I think sometimes there's just not the tolerance for, the time it might take to do it.
That's a good view. I definitely agree. And I think a key thing you pointed out there is the teams, letting the teams do it. Sometimes in large organizations, you tend to have a separate architecture area that they don't have to build and run the products, right? So, but they're going to take care of some of the strategic architecture, and is at the right place, right? Maybe you have to have that, but there needs to be a partnership to understand the run state, right? And the deploy. It wasn't my dog, but I felt like it was. It was right. So let's get to a few of these questions here. The top one that we have, I think, is a very valuable question. How has DevOps changed after the wake of remote work with COVID-19?
I'll take a first stab at that. I know Brian and Courtney can have specific, but one of the things I did, the advantage of having a good network of friends that are in different places. About April last year, I decided just as a whim to do some sort of impromptu research about how everybody was dealing with business continuity, and it wasn't making sense. And one of the things I came to conclusion was there were the three types of organizations, that exist sort of anywhere with any sort of compelling change, right? It's build and take advantage. It's the Winston Churchill, like, don't let a good crisis go to waste. There's the retract, which is, let's buckle down. It's really hard times. Let's reduce. Let's get rid of headcount. And then there's the sort of the Red Queen, that the Simon Wardley's Red Queen, like running in the same place is basically like it's negative, right? And I found that the organizations that were actually had the mindset already of build and enhancement really thrive. Like, let's take this opportunity. In fact, I think I heard a quote from somebody said, Satya over at Microsoft said, now's the time. Now's the time. Like, we can really take advantage of this, not in this sort of negative way. And, and then if you listen to people I've interviewed about their sort of leadership going into retract mode, I mean, it just exposed all the ills of the social contracts in the remote world. Like, everything that was bad just became multiplied in the remote world, and anyway, so again, it's that long-standing, comms or whatever we call it. If you have that in your DNA, then just like any compelling change or compelling event, like that mindset will be, this is an opportunity, regardless whether it's COVID, whether it's a merger, whatever. So,
Yeah, and just to, to John's point about if you already have that in your DNA, I'll talk a little bit just about my team. It took us about a week to adapt. We spent about a week where we lost situational awareness as a team. And then we tried a few things for pairing and mobbing and different ways of communicating, and then got that back and actually started collaborating even more, even though we went from an area where we were sitting next to each other to only ever seeing each other on Zoom, except for the one beer meetup we had a few months ago for the first time in a year, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's, again, I talk about this, it's all communication, all of it's communication, right? And so if you weren't communicating well as a team anyway, like John said, it's just going to get a lot worse when you went remote. And so how do we, enable people to communicate better? How do we give them the tools to allow them to communicate a lot better? I miss my whiteboard. We need whiteboards, that sort of thing. But Courtney, what are your thoughts?
I think that I think John said, the amplification of some of maybe the challenges that you currently have in your organization definitely showed up for me. So I talked about burden. So one of the watch items, and I think a lot of people felt this, was you went remote. Now you're on all the time. Like, you may have already been on all the time, but now it was like really, really expected. Like, why not? You're home, just jump on Zoom calls. So being able to extract how much additional burden was being created. And I also think there's a great book called The Advantage, which is about the organizations that have focused on culture and like speed to learning and have a strategic advantage when they take a crisis, no matter what the magnitude, and they can adjust quickly. Brian says his team took a week. That's amazing. Like, organizations that can adjust quickly are going to thrive. Like retail, frankly, a retail strategy is probably going to look the same across 20 retailers. But the ones who can get their organization to pivot and adjust quickly are going to be the ones that come out and thrive. And so I think if you had established DevOps practices in advance of COVID, you probably got through that learning loop faster than a lot of organizations. Others, like I was in one before I moved to my other role, where it required mobilization and making trade-offs and doing things that we weren't really great at. It forced us to be great at it and turned into new ways of working that might have taken years to adopt. So there were some benefits that came out of the burning platform to say, oh my gosh, like, why wouldn't we work like this now? And so I think, the one thing that's important, I think we all talked about collaboration and breaking down silos. I think that there were potential opportunities where organizations might have went backward when we all went remote, because you really have to be intentional. You've got to make sure you're setting up those collaboration mechanisms and finding a way to connect in a meaningful way and not losing maybe the system and structure that you had that was enabling your DevOps movement. So anyways, I think that there's been good learning and potentially acceleration of adoption of DevOps, but I also think there's probably been some setbacks as well. And Kojo, I'd be curious to hear what your experience has been.
So I think a little bit of both. Definitely, there's a few setbacks in that, people lose that interaction, that day to day, being able to just walk over and, talk to somebody, stuff like that. But, on the other hand, I think definitely what you said about it accelerating the DevOps journey, because I think it does force us to focus on, exactly, what DevOps is all about, which is basically, developing and deployment made a lot easier. And so, we went in on, what Brian's talking about, communication. So we already communicated really well, but we doubled down on, a lot of the tools and things like that allow us to communicate a lot more seamlessly, but also that allow our processes to flow a lot more seamlessly. So, things like, our in our Git repos, just, protect the branches. And as long as somebody reviews, we're deploying. We're not having a powwow with, 5 or 10 people before you can deploy, which in the office isn't a big deal. But when everybody's at home, you have to wait, until 5 or 10 people join a Zoom meeting so you can say, hey, I want to deploy this thing. not really feasible. So I agree definitely with you that, it's really forced us to double down on the things that have so far made us successful in our DevOps journey.
Very cool. Good perspective. So I think we have time for another question or two here. Talking to Kathy on IM here. So I didn't catch the book name. I'm not totally sure which book name. There is the book we talked about a little bit ago was Team Topologies by Manuel Paris, I believe. You can just Google Team Topologies and it'll come up. We named a whole bunch of books, so we'll have to figure out what that is. Let's see. So Courtney Roy. So when we do the breakouts here in a little bit, Courtney isn't going to be able to join us. So I want to make sure we answer this question. So Courtney, can you repeat your statement? Getting close to the work doesn't mean you have to be a micromanager. If you show up in the right way, you can create trust and
psychological safety.
Psychological safety.
Cool. Let's go to Gambit too. I think that if you want to learn from Lean, what Courtney talked about is that go to Gambit's an important part of Lean in the manufacturing from Toyota that all managers would. I would highly. I'm sure another book, if you really want to read, a great book, is called Toyota Kata by Mike Rother, and he will really tell you. So I know Courtney is very well versed in the practice of that the material from that book, but he really talks a lot about how what Toyota did was they didn't just let somebody call in a failure. Everybody went to the line to try to understand, what was going on. It was an important,
Yeah. And John, I love that you brought that up. And when the leaders showed up, they said, what can I do to help? Not who pulled the andon cord, who said we have a problem. It's like, I'm here to help. What do you need?
Yeah, and like we could geek all night, all day, but the first question the leader would ask, it wouldn't be like, why did you stop the line? Explain to me. It was a thank you for stopping the line because you've given us an opportunity to learn. And it's just a whole different way of thinking that's brilliantly prosed.
I have a thought experiment, which is how many Toyota line managers as a percentage don't understand the work versus engineering line managers, software engineering line managers who don't understand the work. I'd like to know what that relative percentage is.
Well, I mean, the thing about the Toyota, right, was that there was this holistic view of their purpose. They didn't see themselves as the brake person, and in fact, one of their strengths was not only the interchangeability of the parts in the line, but the interchangeability. I mean, you go back to that sort of funny movie with Michael Keaton, right, where like the difference between Japanese workers and lines, but anybody, one day you might sweep the floor, the next day you might do the brakes, the next day, and in American culture, the Numi story, right, which is, oh, no, I ain't sweeping the floor. There ain't no way. And the efficiencies you get out of that and the why would you sweep the floor if you were an engineer? Because you're producing a car in a country where 70% of somebody's income, it costs to buy that car. I mean, that's so it is. There's this beautiful intrinsic nature of what Toyota knew, and that culture knew about, being part of a system that I think we struggle in Western culture even today to understand. I don't know if I really answered your question, Brian, but
it has us all just thinking, John. You're good at that. You get it. You get our minds going. That's fantastic. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop us here because we're gonna move over to the other mode where we'll actually be at tables. Courtney, thank you so much for coming. I know that you're gonna have to jet. You're not gonna be able to join us at tables, but the other four of us will actually be at a table. And I just put it in the chat on what table we'll go to. So it doesn't automatically take us there. We will show up at those tables. But next time we schedule this little get together for all of us to talk, it's going to need to be like 8 hours because I think we could use 8 hours and maybe multiple days because these topics just can go on and on and on and on. The questions that are in the Q&A still, if you put those in there, take those to the table. I think I read through them. I think those are very valid, good questions to ask. Take those to the table. I think the person at the table can definitely talk through those. So Kathy, are you going to jump on real quick, or are we just going to flip over?
So my script tells me I just need to say a few things before we do that. Obviously, just an incredibly fluid, smooth, cool conversation today, and I just feel, honored that we had each of our panelists today. So I just want to make a special recognition and a shout out to Kojo Panford, Courtney Kissler, Brian Fenster, John Willis, and Kevin Odell for sharing their insights on DevOps. Our next Tech Industry Luncheon is on May 21st. The program's team is currently finalizing the plans for the speaker at the luncheon, so please watch for announcements in our weekly calendar of events email. And you can check the website, which is www.techtitans.org. As Kevin said, the speakers will each move to a table. There's a maximum of 6 seats that are available at each table. So if you want to join a table, just double click on the center of the table and you'll be allowed to join. You will be able to see who is in attendance by looking at the names in the chat room or by single clicking on anyone's circular avatar in the ballroom to see where they're at. If you'd like to change tables, double click on the center of the table you wish to move to. During the networking session, you can also click on the UT Design sponsor logo and find out more information about their program. So let's go network.